Welcome to Module 2, Strategies for Identification and Early Recognition of Talent Potential. In this module, we're going to explore culturally responsive approaches to recognizing gifts and talents that may be hidden by language barriers, economic disadvantages, or traditional assessment methods. And together, we're going to discover how to create environments where every student's unique abilities can flourish through early recognition and thoughtful support. So let's understand the talent recognition in our context. Traditional gifted education models have often overlooked students from diverse backgrounds, creating an identification gap that persists across many, many districts in the United States. This underrepresentation of culturally and linguistically diverse students, or CLD, in gifted programs, they stem from these components. They rely on standardized testing that may contain cultural or linguistic bias, limited conceptions of what constitutes giftedness, lack of PD for teachers in recognizing non-traditional manifestations of talent, insufficient opportunities for talent to emerge in standard classroom settings. So to address these challenges, we must shift from our deficit thinking identification. So that is, what do students lack? We're very good as teachers, we're very good at pointing out what students can't do. But we want to shift from deficit-based identification to strength-based identification, which is what are the unique abilities that the students possess? What are their strengths? What am I missing? The consequences of these gaps are significant. Students with exceptional talent and potential may never receive appropriate educational challenges, leading to disengagement, underachievement, and unrealized potential that affects both the individual and the society. So in this module, I will offer practical strategies for making this crucial transition in your school or your district. Strength-based identification practices. We need to focus on potential, not just achievement. Students are more than just a test score. We have to look at creativity, their leadership, their problem-solving abilities, their exceptional reasoning that sometimes may not be reflected on a test score. So we need to look beyond just achievement. We need to observe students' behavior in multiple contexts, not just the classroom. We can gather information about student performance in different settings, in the playground, in the cafeteria, during library, in clubs, in other structured or unstructured activities. We need to collaborate with others that are in these other contexts. We need to involve multiple stakeholders. Get input from your specialists, parents, community members, and previous teachers who may have observed different facets of a student's ability. Cultural brokers can help interpret behaviors that might be manifestations of giftedness within that specific cultural context. These practices should be implemented systematically throughout the school year, not just during formal identification windows, to ensure that continuous opportunities for talent to emerge and are being recognized. So strength-based identification requires a mindset shift from finding the gifted few, the gifted few, to recognizing and developing potential in students. So research has shown that when schools adopt strength-based approaches, identifications rates go up significantly, sometimes more than 300%. Cultural linguistic responsiveness in talent identification. There are cultural expressions of giftedness that exist in diverse groups. So they may value or nurture different talents and expressions of intelligence. So we need to understand these cultural variations, which is essential for equitable identification. For example, leadership may manifest in behind the scenes influence rather than being overt and direct. Creativity might appear in problem solving approaches rather than just artistic or creative expression. Strong oral traditions, such as storytelling, may indicate verbal giftedness even when writing skills are still developing. Respect for authority might mask questioning behaviors that indicate critical thinking. In some cultures, it is disrespectful to question authority, but this does not mean they do not have leadership potential. Linguistic considerations. So, for English learners, we need to carefully distinguish between language development and cognitive ability. For example, use nonverbal assessments whenever appropriate. Have them perform a task, do a project, an oral presentation, rather than a multiple choice test. Look for rapid acquisition of new concepts despite language barriers. For example, we have WIDA standards in the United States, which English learners go through 6 or 7 levels. They're called LAU levels. A student that rapidly progresses through the LAU levels, beginning at 1, which is very, very limited English, to know English, to being English dominant at level 6 or 7. If you have a student that is rapidly progressing through the WIDA standards, their LAU levels, that could be a sign of giftedness. Also, provide assessments in native languages whenever possible. Consider translation services for your parents. If you have a nomination form or a referral form, or ask for information, make sure that those are translated into their native home language. Some key cultural considerations that I want you to think about and look over when we're talking or discussing Latino culture. Cultural identity, the family dynamics, their communication styles, different definitions of giftedness, cultural bias and testing, socioeconomic factors, representation, mentorship and role models, emotional and social needs. I encourage you to take a look at each of these cultural considerations and understand a little bit more about the Latino culture and students and family populations. Building linguistic bridges, language sensitive assessments, strategies. Native language assessment, try to use assessments that are in the student's primary language whenever possible. Linguistic modifications, implement assessment accommodations that minimize the linguistic load without altering the cognitive demands or tasks. For example, strategies you can include are simplified instructions, directions, maybe extended time, the use of visuals, allowing students to demonstrate understanding through multiple response formats, such as oral, written, or demonstration. Developmental approach. Recognize that L's abilities may manifest directly at various stages of language acquisition. Implement dynamic assessment protocols that evaluate learning potential rather than current knowledge. Document their growth trajectories and rapid rate of skill acquisition as indicators of exceptional learning capability. So, to effectively implement these strategies, make sure that your assessment guidelines explicitly address linguistic considerations. Ensure that all staff involved in the identification process receive training on second language acquisition patterns. Maintain ongoing communication with families about assessment purposes and procedures, preferably in their native language. Dr. Jaime Castellano, a dear mentor of mine who recently passed away about a year ago, he said, assessment should illuminate rather than obscure potential. When we adapt our methods to see past language differences, we discover intellectual gifts that have always been present, but previously invisible to our evaluation systems. He is an expert on, diverse, gifted Latino populations. He has several books out and research studies. I really encourage you to look at the work he has done on this population. Evidence-based identification strategies. We need to move beyond traditional identification. Methods require a comprehensive, multifaceted approach that captures diverse expressions of advanced potential. Remember, identification is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. We should create systems that allow for talent emergence at any grade level and throughout the school year. 3 things that you can do. Universal screening that we have already discussed. Spotting protocols such as the TOPS, the teacher observation for potential in students, which I have linked in the handout for you to take a look at. Family input. Collect information from the families about the students' interests, strengths, and behaviors at home. We see what we see in the classroom and while students are in school, but what we don't see in homes often gives us a lot of input as far as their strong interests, collections they may have at home, and other things that students are engaged with, sports, the arts, that we might not see in the classroom. Classroom-based assessment strategies. For example, you can use performance tasks. These are tasks in classrooms with high ceilings that allow students to demonstrate their advanced abilities beyond grade level expectations. For example, instead of a simple book report, create a challenge where students must redesign the story from a different character's perspective, revealing analytical thinking and creativity. Also, observational protocols. Structured observation forms that help teachers document behaviors that are indicative of talent potential during regular classroom activities. The TOPS that we have trained our teachers on is an observation tool where they begin to look at traits that are teacher pleasing, traits we like to see in our students, but also non-teacher pleasing traits that such as a student being argumentative, or their sense of humor, or a student that questions authority. These are traits that are non-teacher pleasing, but that may be indicative of talent potential. And so teachers are trained to document and notice and recognize those traits of potentially giftedness. Also, student work portfolios. Collect students' work across time in all subjects. Identify those patterns of exceptional performance. Include student reflections, exit tickets, anything that shows their interest, strong interest, and their learning process. For example, a digital portfolio of students with videos of students explaining can also capture their verbal reasoning abilities that you might not see in written work or in tests. These classroom-based assessments provide authentic evidence of student capabilities and are particularly valuable for identifying talent in students who may underperform in standardized measures. When implementing these approaches, provides teachers with sufficient training and time for observation and documentation to ensure consistent and equitable implementation. What I have noticed with our teachers is the more they do this and engage with this type of talent scouting and classroom-based assessment strategies, it becomes a breeze. It just becomes part of the way that they teach in their classrooms. Dr. Herman Diaz, the Milwaukee Public Schools District Gifted Coordinator, he said, when we expanded our definition of giftedness and implemented multiple identification pathways, we saw a 250% increase in Latino and L students participating in our advanced programs within just 2 years. Distinguishing language development from cognitive ability. One of the most challenging aspects of talent identification is distinguishing between language acquisition processes and intellectual abilities, particularly for English learners. So, misinterpreting language development needs as cognitive limitations frequently leads to the identification of gifted Ls. So, three things I would like you to consider: language acquisition markers. Vocabulary development follows a predictable pattern. Grammar and syntax errors are developmental. Social language develops before academic vocabulary and language. They may show silent periods during acquisition. Cognitive ability indicators. This rapid learning of concepts once understood. Strong memory for content despite language challenges. Their advanced reasoning that are visible through nonverbal means. And exceptional problem solving approaches. Assessment approaches. Use native languages assessments when possible. Employ nonverbal reasoning measures, such as the Koget or the Neglary. Allow demonstration through multiple modalities. Instead of paper pencil tests, try performance tasks, projects, and things like that. Consider rate of language acquisition as a potential indicator. Research done by Castellano and Diaz in 2002 found that gifted Ls often show exceptional abilities in mathematical reasoning, spatial relationships, and pattern recognition that can be observed regardless of English proficiency. Administrators should ensure that identification committees include English as a second language specialists who can provide this critical perspective during the review process. Scaffolding for talent development before formal identification. So, waiting for formal identification before providing talent development opportunities creates a significant equity gap. So instead, implement scaffolding strategies that allow potential to emerge through supported challenge. This was a game changer for us in Milwaukee Public Schools. First, create low floor, high ceiling activities. Second, implement cluster grouping. It is important for students to be grouped with like-minded peers for several times throughout the day or throughout the week. This is much different from tracking, where they are permanently placed with like-minded peers. Provide talent spotting opportunities. Create regular talent spotlights where students can opt in a challenge in enrichment activity in various domains. Schools that implemented these approaches typically identified 15 to 20% more students from diverse backgrounds for gifted services compared to schools relying solely on traditional identification methods. Tiered supports for recognizing potential. The multi-tiered systems of support has 3 levels: Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. There's also MTSS for advanced learners. Tier 1, enrichment. All students should participate in activities designed to reveal strengths and talents. This is done universally for everyone. Tier 2, targeted talent development. This is for some students that may need more advanced learning opportunities. Tier 3, intensive talent support. For students that are demonstrating exceptional potential, they should receive something that few students need. Tier 1 casts a wider net and creates multiple entry points to the identification process. In Tier 2, it allows students to demonstrate potential through supported challenges. Tier 3, this represents the transition to more intensive specialized services. So our key takeaways and our next steps. Remember that identification is not an end goal, but rather the beginning of a journey to develop each student's unique potential. The most effective schools create systems where talent development and identification form a continuous cycle, ensuring that no brilliant mind goes undiscovered or under-nurtured. So, what do? Cast a wider net. Nurture before identifying. Embrace cultural responsiveness. At the bottom, I outline 5 action steps for implementation. Audit your current identification practices. Develop a comprehensive plan for tiered talent development support opportunities. 3, establish professional learning communities focused on talent recognition. 4, create partnerships with families and communities. Lastly, implement regular data reviews to monitor your identification rates. So I'd like you to discuss with your team and answer 2 discussion prompts. How can we distinguish between language acquisition challenges and overlooked abilities? What Tier 1 and Tier 2 strategies can help us spot high potential in your setting or your grade bands? For your applied tasks, there's a reading that I'd like you to look at and read on this specific topic. Afterwards, review and improve your current identification guidelines and your screening and observational protocols that you might have in place in your district or in your school. I have linked um, Milwaukee Public Schools gifted identification guidelines and gifted services for you to take a look at. It's several pages long, but I want you to notice the way it was organized and ways that multiple criteria that we have used and implemented to identify your students. And there's also a mini rubric linked for evaluating classroom identification tools. Thank you